My name is Emily Thompson. I am 31 years old. 5 years ago, my sister in law looked me dead in the eye and told me I was a gold digger who would ruin her brother's life and the family would never accept me into their world. It hurt because I was 28 and desperate to help my younger sister with her medical bills. But now everything is colliding in the emergency room of the Columbus Hospital, where my husband is hooked up to machines after a sudden collapse, his liver failing faster than expected. I clutch the secret lab results in my purse that prove my sister in law is the one poisoning him. I swore in that moment to expose her lies and protect what matters most, no matter the cost. If you have ever had a sister in law who made you feel like you did not belong in your own marriage, hit that like button and tell me in the comments what your experience was like. I read every single one, and it helps more than you know. I sat there in the hard plastic chair of the waiting room, the smell of antiseptic burning my nose, watching the clock tick past 3 in the morning while doctors rushed in and out of my husband's room. My hands would not stop shaking. This was not supposed to happen. 11 months ago, I had married my husband in a quiet courthouse ceremony because my younger sister needed $380,000 for an experimental bone marrow transplant that insurance would not touch. My husband, a 63-year-old man who had built a successful cold chain logistics company from one refrigerated truck in the 1980s, had only 11 months left, according to his doctors. The arrangement was simple on paper. I would live in his 5,800 square foot house in our quiet suburban neighborhood outside Columbus, keep him company, coordinate his care. And in exchange, the company would cover my younger sister's full treatment, plus leave me $800,000 and 2 years in the guest house. It was never meant to be love, it was a transaction. But somewhere in those first few months, something shifted. My husband treated me like a real person. He remembered I hated cilantro and wrote it on a little notepad he kept by his reading chair. He tipped the grocery delivery driver $20 every single time and asked the landscaping crew about their kids by name. The silence at breakfast, with his chipped blue ceramic mug and my plain Target mug, was comfortable, not awkward. I started caring about the man I had married for money, and that is when I started noticing the pattern. Mondays he was fine. Tuesdays he slowed down a little. Wednesdays he crashed hard with nausea and confusion. Thursdays were the worst. Then by Friday afternoon, he would start coming back sharp and funny again on the weekends. It was too regular to be natural. I had spent 4 years behind a pharmacy counter in a small town in Indiana, counting pills and catching errors. My brain was wired to spot cycles. I mentioned it casually to my sister-in-law over coffee one morning. She had lived in the converted carriage house attached to the property for 12 years, running the household with the quiet confidence of someone who knew every fuse box and every doctor. She smiled that same hotel lobby smile and said the disease had cycles. It was related to bile acid fluctuations, nothing to worry about. The way she said it landed wrong, like she was proud of the pattern. I did not push then. I had nothing but a hunch. My younger sister was still in the hospital, fighting an infection in her port line, and the transplant timeline was getting tight. The guilt sat on my chest like a stone. I had married this man for money, and now I cared about him, and I was watching him decline on a schedule that did not make medical sense. My sister-in-law prepared his pills every Sunday evening in the locked medication room off the main hallway. 14 pills and capsules a day. Nobody else touched the organizer. The door had a lock, the only locked door in the entire house. When I asked about it, she said liability reasons. It made sense at the time. The second week, I had my first real conversation with my husband in the library. He asked about my younger sister, not in a checking a box way, but really listened when I told him about selling our mother's jewelry and the GoFundMe that raised only $11,400. He said she sounded like a person worth fighting for. Then he asked if I liked cilantro. I said I would rather eat a candle. He wrote it down. No cilantro. Like it mattered. Like I mattered. Something in my chest did a little flip I was not prepared for. Then my sister-in-law started planting seeds. She told my husband I seemed exhausted and not quite myself lately. She mentioned to his business partner, Victor Lang, that I had been going through rooms in the house. She changed the medication schedule so I could not watch her prepare the organizer. It was always casual, always with that smile. My sister in law was competent, she was indispensable. And she knew I was temporary, or at least she thought I was. One Tuesday night, I could not sleep. I walked past the medication room, and the door was cracked open maybe an inch. My sister in law had gotten a phone call during dinner and left the table mid sentence, rattled enough to forget the lock. I pushed the door open. The weekly organizer sat on the counter. I opened Wednesday's compartment first. The unmarked white capsule felt heavier than Monday's. I twisted it open over a paper towel. The powder was too fine, slightly yellowish, where it should have been white. This was not commercial. Someone had compounded it by hand. I heard the front door. I scooped most of the powder back, twisted the capsule shut, put everything back exactly as I found it, and stepped out. My sister-in-law appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing her coat. She asked if I could not sleep. I said hot flash, even though I was only 31. She nodded and suggested chamomile. I stood at the sink for 4 minutes after she left legs like overcooked spaghetti. The next morning, I took two of the unmarked capsules, one heavy and one light, and swapped them with fish oil capsules from the shelf. I drove 90 minutes to Indianapolis to see my old pharmacy colleague, Tara Jenkins, at her compounding pharmacy. I handed her the Ziploc bag. She opened the heavier one first, smelled it, rubbed a tiny amount between gloved fingers. "This is not commercial," she said. "Someone made these. The particle size is too consistent, and the load varies on purpose. You need a lab. It is $340. I paid it with the last of my checking account and prayed the vending machine at the lab would take coins. While I waited for results, my brain started chewing on another theory. Maybe it was my husband's business partner, Victor. He had been visiting every 2 weeks. I went through his rental car one afternoon while he was having dinner with my husband and my sister-in-law. No pills, no powder, just a self-help book and receipts. His flight records did not line up with the worst days. Dead end. My sister-in-law noticed the change in me. She told my husband I had been asking too many questions about the supplements. She moved the morning pills to her own apartment. Just like that, I was blind. Then the Thursday came when my husband collapsed in the kitchen. My sister-in-law was standing in the doorway, watching with that same smile when the paramedics arrived. She told the EMTs it was probably just the disease progressing. I rode in the ambulance with my husband, while my sister-in-law followed in her car. In the emergency room, the doctor, Dr. Elena Vargas, looked at his blood work and frowned. The decline rate was steeper than expected. I slipped the lab report to my attorney, Richard Kane, the next morning. He called the Boone County Prosecutor's office. I told him everything. The pattern, the locked room, the variable doses, the lab results that came back showing colchicine, a gout medication that is hepatotoxic in sustained doses. The heavier Wednesday capsule had roughly 3 milligrams, the lighter one, 1.5. Someone was cycling the dose to mimic the natural ups and downs of chronic liver disease. Richard was quiet for 4 seconds. "Do not confront her. Do not change anything. I am calling Dr. Vargas and the prosecutor's office. You did good, Emily." That was the first time anyone in this mess told me I did good. I sat on the hospital porch steps with the October air sharp around me and cried for 90 seconds. Then I stopped because I had things to do. That night, I watched my sister-in-law bring my husband his evening medications in her apartment. She came out with an empty tray. He came out 40 minutes later, already looking pale. I smiled at both of them and said goodnight and went to my room vibrating with rage that looped back around to calm. The next morning, Richard's office had a detective, Dr. Vargas, and the full picture. They traced the colchicine back to orders placed under a fake name from a chemical supply company. My sister-in-law's laptop search history included colchicine liver toxicity, timeline, and cumulative dose effects. Over the past 9 years, she had also skimmed $211,000 from household accounts with phantom invoices. The will amendment that cut her share from $3.4 million plus the lake house down to 800,000, with no property, had been the trigger. She started the capsules weeks before I ever moved in to accelerate the timeline and make the marriage arrangement urgent. The detective asked me about access. I told him everything. Dr. Vargas confirmed the dosing would produce symptoms indistinguishable from advancing liver disease. The variable schedule explained the weekly cycle perfectly. Heavier loads midweek, creating crashes, lighter loads on weekends, allowing partial recovery. All of it invisible inside the noise of a chronic disease. Richard made one more call. The wire for my younger sister's treatment had cleared. Her procedure was scheduled. I let out a breath I had been holding for 11 months. My younger sister was safe. Now I could deal with my sister-in-law. Friday afternoon, the detective, a uniformed officer, Richard, and Dr. Vargas arrived at the house together. I let them in. My husband was in the library. My sister-in-law was in the kitchen preparing his afternoon medication tray. Richard asked my sister-in-law to join us in the living room. She walked in, wiping her hands on a dish towel, that hotel lobby smile in full effect. The detective placed the lab report on the coffee table and asked about the unmarked capsules. My sister-in-law did not flinch. I do not know what you are referring to. All of my husband's medications are prescribed by his doctors. I simply organize them. The detective said the name colchicine and the variable doses. My sister-in-law looked at me, not at the detective, and for the first time, the smile was gone. She pointed at me. She put them there. She has access to the kitchen. She has been going through rooms in the house. Victor will tell you. Ask Victor. But Victor did not back her up. Richard had already told him the truth. My sister-in-law's calculation face appeared the rapid mental math of a woman realizing the walls were closing in. My husband looked at her with confusion, not anger. My sister-in-law, he said quietly, did you do this? She opened her mouth closed. It opened it again. Nothing came out. The police searched her apartment. In the cabinet above her bathroom sink, they found a bag of bulk colchicine powder, ordered online, a capsule filling machine, and the laptop with the search history. They found the phantom invoices too. My sister-in-law went from the most powerful person in my husband's life to defendant in the state of Ohio versus her. The police searched her apartment right there while we all stood frozen in the living room. Detective Michael Reeves, a no-nonsense man with 20 years on the force, led the team upstairs to the converted carriage house. My sister-in-law kept that same hotel lobby smile plastered on her face, even as the uniformed officer started opening drawers. She looked straight at me and said, "This is all a misunderstanding, Emily. You have no idea what you have started." Her voice was calm, almost pitying, like I was the one who had lost my mind. My husband sat in his usual chair by the window hands, trembling worse than usual, staring at the coffee table where the lab report still lay open. He did not speak at first. Then he turned to her and said in a voice I had never heard from him before, "If this is true, you tell me right now." It was not anger exactly. It was something sharper, like the ground had shifted under him, and he was testing whether it would hold. My sister-in-law laughed a short, brittle sound. "You know me. I have been here for 12 years. I have managed every single detail of your life. And now this new wife shows up with some Ziploc bag, and suddenly, I am the villain." She glanced at Victor Lang, who had arrived 20 minutes earlier after Richard Kane called him. Victor shifted in his seat, but did not back her up. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, I saw the flight records myself. The worst days did not line up with anything except your Sunday night pill prep. That was the first real crack in her armor." Her eyes narrowed, and for a split second, the smile slipped into something ugly. Detective Michael Reeves came back downstairs holding a clear evidence bag with the bulk powder and the little manual capsule machine. "We are going to need everyone to stay put for statements," he said. My attorney, Richard Kane, stepped forward with his paralegal, Amanda Hayes, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 30s, who had been taking notes since the moment they arrived. Amanda handed me a fresh copy of the lab results and whispered, "Tara Jenkins already confirmed the particle analysis matches the online orders. This is airtight." I nodded. but my stomach was in knots. My younger sister had called earlier that morning to say the transplant prep was finally moving forward now that the wire had cleared, but the doctors had found a small shadow on her latest scan that needed one more test before they could proceed. The timing felt like the universe was still testing me. My sister-in-law was not done. She turned to my husband and lowered her voice into that reasonable tone she had used on him for years. Think about it. I adjusted your supplements every week because you asked me to monitor your energy. Remember last year when you said the Wednesdays felt off? I was trying to help. My husband's face changed. The confusion hardened into something I could not read at first. He stood up slowly, gripping the back of the chair. Help, he repeated. Then in a voice that carried across the room, he snapped, If you were helping, why did my blood work look like I had 6 months left when the disease alone should have given me years? It was the first time I had ever heard him raise his voice in that house. He did not yell. It was controlled, almost icy, but the room went dead silent. My sister-in-law blinked, caught off guard by the outburst. She opened her mouth to answer, but he held up one shaking hand and said, No, not now. Then he walked out of the living room without another word, leaving the rest of us standing there. Detective Michael Reeves took my sister-in-law into the study for formal questioning. Richard and Amanda stayed with me in the kitchen while we waited. Amanda poured me a glass of water and said quietly, The embezzlement alone is $211,000 over 9 years. Phantom landscaping invoices fake cleaning services routed to a post office box she controlled. Even if the poisoning charge gets pled down, the financial case is rock solid. I nodded, but my mind kept replaying the way my husband had looked at me right before he left the room. There had been doubt, there a flicker of wondering whether I had somehow been part of this from the beginning. I had married him for money. Everyone knew that. My sister-in-law had spent weeks planting the idea that I was unstable, that I was going through rooms looking for valuables. Now the evidence was on the table, but the trust I had slowly built with my husband felt like it was cracking open. 2 hours later, my sister-in-law came out of the study in handcuffs. She stopped right in front of me on her way to the patrol car. Her voice dropped so only I could hear. You think this ends it? My husband still needs someone who actually knows how this house runs. You are still the outsider with the dented Kia, and the sister who needed $380,000. Good luck explaining why you stayed once the money cleared. The words hit like a slap, but I did not flinch. I just looked at her and said, I stayed because I started caring about him. That is something you never understood. She smirked as the officer led her away, but I saw the calculation in her eyes. She was already thinking about her next move. My husband did not come back downstairs until after dark. I was sitting at the kitchen island with my Target mug staring at nothing when he walked in. His hands were steadier than they had been in weeks now that the colchicine was out of his system, but his face looked older. He pulled out the stool next to me and sat down. For a long minute, neither of us spoke. Then he said, I need to know something, Emily. When you took those capsules to the lab, did you ever think about just letting it play out? Letting me die faster so you could collect the $800,000 and move on with your sister? The question landed between us like a live wire. I felt my chest tighten. This was the man who had written no cilantro on his notepad like it mattered. This was the man who had listened to every detail about my younger sister's hospital bed jokes. And now he was asking me if I had considered murdering him for the payout? I looked him straight in the eye. Never. Not once. I cracked open that capsule at 2 in the morning because I could not stand the thought of someone hurting you. My voice cracked on the last word. He studied my face for what felt like forever. Then he reached over and covered my hand with his. The touch was warm, familiar, but there was a hesitation in it that had never been there before. I believe you, he said finally. But everything feels different now. The whole timeline, the will changed the way I started to care about you. I need time to think about what this arrangement really means going forward. He did not say the words contract or renegotiate, but I heard them anyway. The partial victory I had been clinging to started to taste like ash. Later that night, after everyone had left and the house felt too quiet, my phone buzzed. It was my younger sister. Her voice was tired but hopeful. The shadow on the scan was nothing serious, just inflammation from the antibiotics. They are scheduling the transplant for next week. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. My younger sister was going to be okay. The $380,000 had done its job. But as I hung up and looked around the kitchen, that was never really mine, I realized the cost was still climbing. My husband had started pulling back just a little, the way someone does when the ground under them has shifted. And my sister-in-law, even from jail, had managed to plant one last seed of doubt that might never fully die. I lay in the guest room that night, staring at the ceiling, the same crown molding I had once joked about with my husband, now feeling like a reminder that nothing here had ever belonged to me. The rage I had felt earlier had cooled into something heavier. I had saved my husband's life and my younger sister's future, but in the process, I might have lost the one thing I had not even known I wanted, the quiet companionship that had started to feel like home. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I wondered if my sister-in-law was already smiling behind bars, knowing she had taken something from me after all. The next morning, the house felt different, like the air itself had changed. I walked into the kitchen and found my husband already at the island with his chipped blue mug, but he did not slide my Target mug across the counter the way he used to. He just looked up and said, "We need to talk about the arrangement, Emily." His voice was quiet, steady, but there was a distance in it that had not been there even on his worst Wednesdays before the truth came out. I sat down across from him and waited. My sister-in-law had planted that last seed so perfectly that even handcuffs could not stop it from growing. He told me the doctors had run new panels. Without the colchicine cycling through his system, his real liver disease was progressing slowly the way it should have all along. Years, not months. The 6 to 9 month timeline my sister-in-law had engineered to rush the marriage was a lie from the beginning. He said the words carefully, like he was testing each one. "I am grateful you caught it. My younger sister is getting her transplant next week because of you. But everything I thought I knew about the last 11 months feels manufactured. The urgency, the companionship clause, even the way I started to care about you. I cannot unsee that." He did not accuse me of anything. He did not need to. The doubt sat between us like the unmarked capsules once had. I felt the sting sharp in my chest, but I kept my voice even. I never asked for anything except what the contract said. I stayed because I started to see you, not the money. He nodded, but his hand did not reach for mine. Instead, he said, "Richard Kane is drawing up an amendment. You keep the $800,000 and the 2 years in the guest house. My younger sister's treatment is paid. But the marriage itself, we will keep it legal on paper until the 2 year mark if you want. After that, we can dissolve it quietly. No hard feelings." The words landed like a final dose of something bitter. Partial victory. I had saved my younger sister. I had stopped my sister-in-law. My husband would live longer than anyone expected. But the quiet mornings, the notepad notes, the feeling that I finally belonged somewhere, those were gone. Irreversible. 2 days later, my younger sister called from the hospital in Indianapolis. Her voice was stronger than it had been in months. The transplant went perfectly. The doctors say the numbers look better than they hoped. I cried in the guest room, with the door closed so my husband would not hear. My younger sister was going to live. That part was real. That part was mine. My attorney, Richard Kane, called the same afternoon with Detective Michael Reeves on the line. My sister-in-law had been formally charged with attempted murder in the first degree, elder abuse, and embezzlement, totaling $211,000. The capsule machine, the bulk powder, the laptop search history, it was all ironclad. Victor Lang had given a full statement confirming the timeline of her lies about the will. Tara Jenkins from the compounding pharmacy sent an affidavit about the particle analysis. Dr. Elena Vargas testified that the dosing pattern explained every anomaly in my husband's charts. My sister-in-law's public defender tried one last angle, claiming I had framed her because I wanted the inheritance, but the judge laughed it out of the room. She would sit in county jail until the preliminary hearing. No bail. I drove to the jail the next morning anyway. Not to gloat, I just needed to see her face one more time. They let me sit across from her behind the glass. She picked up the phone and gave me that same hotel lobby smile, only now it looked cracked at the edges. "You think you won, Emily?" she said, voice low and venomous. "My husband will never trust you again. I made sure of that. Every Sunday night, when I filled that organizer, I was protecting what was mine. You were always the temporary wife. Temporary." I leaned closer to the glass. I did not win. I just refused to lose everything, and that is enough. I hung up the phone and walked out without looking back. Her words still burned, but they no longer controlled me. Back at the house, my husband was in the library with his shipwreck books. He looked up when I came in, and for a second, I saw the old softness. Then it shuddered. "I heard she is staying in custody," he said. I nodded. "Good." He closed the book. "Emily, I meant what I said. The guest house is yours for the full 2 years. You earned that, but the mornings, the conversations, I think we both need space to figure out what is real and what was manufactured by her." He did not say he was sorry for doubting me. He did not say he still cared. The silence that used to feel safe now felt like a locked door. I moved my things into the guest house that weekend. Not because he asked me to, but because I needed to breathe air that did not carry the weight of 11 months of secrets. My younger sister came home from the hospital 3 weeks later. I drove down to Indianapolis and brought her back to my old apartment for recovery. She hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. "You did it, big sister. You saved us both." I smiled, but the victory tasted bittersweet. I had saved us, at the cost of the one relationship that had started to feel like home. Months later, my husband's hands trembled less. He still drank from the chipped blue mug. He still tipped the grocery driver $20. But when I stopped by the main house to pick up mail, he offered me coffee and we sat on opposite sides of the island like polite strangers. The companionship was gone. The contract remained, but the connection had been poisoned right along with his supplements. My sister-in-law had lost everything: her freedom, her skimmed money, her place in the will. Yet she had managed to take something from me too. The quiet belief that someone could see me as more than a transaction. I sat on the back porch of the guest house one cool October evening, the same porch where I had once cried after the lab results came in. My phone buzzed with a photo from my younger sister, her standing in the hospital hallway, giving a thumbs-up hair and a messy not green Jell-O in one hand. She looked alive. Really alive. I smiled at the screen and set the phone down. I had chosen myself in the end. I had refused to let my sister-in-law's calculated cruelty destroy the only two people who mattered. But the price was the quiet mornings I would never get back, the trust that had been shattered before it could fully form the version of this marriage that almost became real. I learned something sitting on that porch, with the leaves turning orange and red. Family is not always blood or paper contracts. Sometimes it is the person who writes "no cilantro" on a notepad because your opinion mattered. And sometimes that person gets taken from you, not by death, but by the slow poison of doubt planted by someone who was supposed to protect the house. My sister-in-law showed me exactly how deep resentment can run. I showed her that a pharmacy technician from a small town could still bring down an empire built on 12 years of lies. In the end, I kept my younger sister and my self-respect. I lost the one thing I never knew I was fighting to keep. Thank you for listening to my story all the way to the end. It still hurts to tell, but saying it out loud makes the weight a little lighter. If you have ever watched someone you started to care about pull away because of someone else's lies, drop a comment below and tell me how you handled it. I read every single one.